Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will answer the question, what is a custom query? Now I think the best way to answer that question is to begin with its opposite first. So what is a normal WordPress query, or what is a default query? Well, so far in the course, you and I have not had to manually query any content or data ourselves. WordPress automatically queries the appropriate content for us based on the particular URL that we are visiting. So for example, up in the header, if I click on the About Us page, WordPress will look at that URL and see the About Us slug, and then WordPress knows to only query the database for that one page named About Us. Things like the title and the content. Let me show you another example of a standard or default query. So up in the address bar, if I visit /blog, remember in the WordPress settings, we designated this page named blog to be our posts page. So WordPress knows to query the most recent 10 posts when we visit this URL. So you get the idea. So far in the course, we've been able to rely on the default queries that WordPress makes for us automatically based on the current URL. So back to the question of the hour, what is a custom query? Well, a custom query is you and I saying, hey, WordPress, I don't care what URL we are currently on, I'm going to tell you the exact content that I want to query. Meaning custom queries allow us to load whatever we want, wherever we want. And this is where WordPress starts to get truly powerful. So right now, let's give ourselves a goal and then use custom queries to achieve that goal. So let's jump back to our website's homepage. I can click this logo in the top left to go there. All right, and in this beige column, we are going to need to load in the 2 most recent blog posts. At this point, let's jump into our text editor and make it happen. So within our theme folder, remember that our homepage is no longer powered by index.php, but instead frontpage.php. So go ahead and open up front page, and then let's just scroll down a bit until we see a headline that reads from our blogs. All right, here I see a heading level 2 that reads from our blogs. And remember, the front end is showing 2 blog posts, so 1, 2. And if we look in the code, this div with a class of event summary that begins here and ends here, that's the first post. And then right below it is another div with that same class, event summary. So ultimately, what we want to do is hollow out all of this hard-coded HTML and instead create a while loop that loops through the blog posts and uses this HTML structure as a template. So that's the ultimate goal. But before we get there, let's scroll back up to that heading level 2 that reads from our blogs. And right below this line, let's just add a little bit of code that says, hello world, testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, so if I save that, here we can see that test message. And before we worry about pulling in dynamic data into this exact template that we see here, let's just write a few practice while loops and custom queries up here where this custom message is. So back in the text editor, instead of this hello world testing 1, 2, 3 line, let's drop into PHP. And first, let's see what happens if we create a while loop without running our own custom query, right? Let's see what WordPress automatically queries for us by default. So I could drop down to a new line in between the opening and closing PHP tags. You don't have to. But let's just write out a while loop. So while, parentheses, curly brackets. Within the parentheses and the condition for the while loop, this is where we say how many times it should repeat itself. So we just say, as long as you still have posts. Okay, so as long as this function returns true, our while loop will continue looping until all of the blog posts have been accounted for. Now within our curly brackets, the first thing we always want to do each pass through the loop is call the function the post, because that gets all of the appropriate data ready. Now at this point, we are free to actually do something with the post. So I want to output a bit of HTML. So why don't I drop out of PHP on this line, and then on the ending curly bracket line, we can go back into PHP. So then on this line in between, we can write HTML. So let's just output a list item just as a test. And within it, let's output the title of whatever blog post or page is being queried. So we can just say the title. All right, now if I save that and refresh the home page, we only see one list item and it reads home. And that's because the post or page associated with this URL, the root of our domain, is a page that just happens to have the title of home. So that's the only thing that WordPress is going to query for by default on this homepage URL. If you're wondering why that's the case, let me refresh your memory. If we jump into the WordPress admin and hover over settings towards the bottom of the sidebar, and then we can click on the reading option. Remember that several lessons ago we customized this option, front page displays, and then we set it to a static page. So front page is your home page, and you can set it to any of your WordPress pages. And it just so happens that we set it to a page named home. And on a similar note, we set our posts page to be a page named blog. So that's why when we visit /blog, WordPress automatically queries the most recent blog posts. And when we visit the home page, WordPress is only querying this one single page. In order to make it super clear what's going on, we could actually go ahead and edit the title of that page. So for example, click on Pages in the sidebar, and then find the page that has a name of Home and click on it to edit it. And we can change the title from Home to Testing 123. And if I update that and then refresh the front end of the home page, we see that reflected. Okay, so if that's the only page that WordPress is going to query by default on the home page, we obviously need to take matters into our own hands and manually query the content that we want, right? We want the 2 most recent blog posts. So let's jump back to the text editor and create our first custom query. Let's create a new line right above the while loop line. And whenever you want to create a new custom query, you begin by creating a variable. Okay, so we could name our query whatever we want to. Let's call it homepage posts. Name doesn't matter, but that's what I'm going with. And then let's say that it equals a new instance of the WP query class. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, this line of code makes complete sense. But I want the code to make sense to anyone and everyone. Now luckily, you don't need any object-oriented programming experience in order to create your own custom queries. Having said that, I don't think it would hurt for me to give you a quick 1 to 2 minute introduction to object-oriented programming. So you don't have to type out these lines that I'm going to type right now. This is just for a quick demo. But let's imagine I had another variable named dog, and I would set it to equal a new instance of a class named animal. Or maybe I would have a variable named cat, and it would also be a new instance of a class named animal. So the first question here is, what is a class? Well, think of a class as a blueprint or a recipe that you can use again and again to create different objects. So in these examples, dog and cat are objects, and obviously animal is the class or the blueprint or recipe. Now there's a lot of differences between a dog and a cat, but there's also a ton of similarities, right? They're both animals. So the idea here is, instead of creating a dog from scratch and a cat from scratch, let's create them from a handy blueprint. And we could imagine that this class of animal will give these objects access to useful functions. So for example, what's something that all animals do? I'm going to say drink water. Right? So maybe this class gives these objects access to a function or method named drink water. So if I wanted my dog to drink water, now that I've created an object with this class as the blueprint, down here I could just take that dog object, look inside the object with dash greater than symbol, and then I could just call the function or method name. So drink water. And the idea is that the code for the animal class could be tucked away nice and neatly in some other file. And once it's created, you can just forget about it. Out of sight, out of mind. So this can keep your code really clean. You just create an object based on a class, and the hundreds of lines of code that create the animal and all of its functions, like for example the drink water function, that code isn't cluttering up this file that we're in right now, right? That code is tucked away. We don't have to worry about it. We don't care how the drink water function is created. We just know that it exists and we can leverage it. Okay, so let me delete these animal lines. But that's exactly what's going on with this line of code. WordPress, out of the box, comes with a class named WP Query that we can leverage. So we are creating a new object with that as our blueprint. And the beauty of this is that you and I don't have to know or care how this class really works. The creators of WordPress maintain this class, and it will do all of the heavy lifting for us. It'll do the tricky stuff like connecting to the database and writing SQL statements to query the database. So we don't have to do any of that. All we need to do within these parentheses is tell this class what type of content we're looking for, or what do we want to query. Now we don't just want to include a simple parameter like this. Instead, we need to supply this class with an array of arguments. So within the parentheses, type out the word array, and then give it its own set of parentheses. And then within the array parentheses, I like to drop down to a new line just to stay organized. And now we just create an associative array to tell this class what we're looking for. So to refresh your memory on associative arrays, that's where we would say something like cat equals meow, right? Or dog equals bark. So what do we actually want to type here? Well, let's begin with a parameter named posts per page. So if I jump back to the home page, remember that we only want to output the 2 most recent posts. Now by default, queries will return 10 posts. So if we want our custom query to only return 2, we can just say posts per page equals 2. Now there are all sorts of other parameters that we can string together here to build the exact custom query that we want, but for the moment, this is all we need. Okay, so at this point, we have an object named homepage posts, and all sorts of useful stuff lives inside this object. Namely, the 2 most recent blog posts, but even beyond that, this object also contains functions or methods that can help us loop through the content. So check this out. Watch how easy it is to use this custom query. So down within our while loop, the functions have posts and the post, these functions are tied to the default automatic query that WordPress makes on its own, right? The default query that's tied to the current URL. So instead of using these functions, we want to use functions or methods that belong to our new custom query object. Now think back to a few minutes ago when we had the example dog and cat objects. Remember that example function of drink water? To use it, I just began with the dog object, and then I looked inside the object with dash greater than, and then I just called the function. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do for the have posts and the post functions. So check this out. Let me delete this example dog line. And within the while loop condition, we don't want to use just have posts because that's tied to the default query. But right before it, we can just look within our custom object. So homepage posts, and then look inside it for a method or function named have posts. And then let's do the same thing for this the post function. Just this on its own is tied to the default query, but right before it, we can take our object, homepage posts, and look within it for the function named the post. Cool, so now our loop code is referencing our custom query. So if I save that and refresh, perfect. We see the titles for the 2 most recent blog posts. Now back to that associative array we were creating, posts per page is just one of many parameters you can use. We could add a comma here and add another parameter. We could say category name only give us posts that are categorized under the awards category. So if I save that, I only have 1 post under that category, but you get the idea. Or we could also say, let me delete these, we could add a parameter called post type, and this defaults to post, right? Blog posts are of the post type of post, but if you say page, well, that will query all of your pages. So we see about us, privacy policy, our history, our goals. Anyways, long story short, there are tons of different parameters that we can experiment with here. We are going to be writing a ton of custom queries before this course is over, but for now, all we really need is posts per page equals 2. Now let's spend the remainder of this lesson using this styling and template for the 2 posts that we are outputting. So back in the text editor, here's our while loop, and instead of just outputting a list item HTML element with the title, instead of just this one line of HTML, let's output this entire event summary div, because this has the styling and structure that will give us this visual appearance. So here's what I do. I would just copy one of these event summary divs into my clipboard, and then I would go ahead and delete that one that I have highlighted and the second event summary div. Okay, but then within our while loop, let's just delete this list item line and then paste in our clipboard. Cool, so if I save that, we see 2 of the exact same thing, but now all we need to do is hollow out this hard-coded fake data with real dynamic data. So let's do that bit by bit. The first thing I see is the month that the post was created on. So let's delete this fake hard-coded Jan for January, and instead we'll drop into PHP and call the function named theTime, and then the code for a 3-letter abbreviation of a month is just uppercase M. Okay, and then for this fake hard-coded 20th day of the month, let's just copy and paste this PHP code we just wrote and delete the 20 and then paste in your clipboard. And the code for the day of the month, instead of uppercase M, is just lowercase d. Okay, the next thing we want to hollow out is this headline. So instead of this fake hard-coded title, let's delete that and instead just drop into PHP and call the title. And let's also provide a real href link value. So when you click on this link, let's delete this hashtag and instead drop into PHP and call the permalink. Now this short excerpt or description text is a bit tricky. So let's delete this fake hard-coded content, but it's not as simple as just using the PHP function named theContent, because that will output way too much content, right? That looks terrible. So instead, we only want to output maybe 1 or 2 lines worth of text, just a brief snippet. So we could say the excerpt instead of the content, but let me show you something even better. So let me delete this the content function call, and instead let's echo out the results of a WordPress function named WP trim words, and then you give this function 2 arguments. The first argument is the content that you want to limit, and then the second argument is how many words you want to limit it to. So for the first argument, let's just say get the content, and then comma, and the second argument, let's limit it to maybe the first 18 words only. So save that, test it out. Cool, that looks pretty good. Let's not forget about this read more link. So back in our text editor, here's the read more link in the href. Instead of typing out the permalink again, let's just copy and paste it from right here. So PHP the permalink, copy it, and then right here, delete the hashtag, paste in your clipboard. And while we're at it, why don't we make it so that if you click on the date, that also takes you to the permalink. So the date is already wrapped in an A element, and here's the href. Let's just delete that, paste in your clipboard. Cool. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, there's one habit that I want to instill in you whenever you use a custom query. And that habit is, once you've created your custom query and used it in a while loop, right after that while loop ends, so here's the ending curly bracket for the while loop, right after that, I want you to get in the habit of calling a function named WP reset post data. And really, this is just our way of cleaning up after we run our custom query. This will reset different WordPress data and global variables back to the state that it was in when it made its default automatic query based on the current URL, right before we came along and made a custom query. Calling this function isn't always 100% necessary, especially if you're towards the bottom of a template file, but it's a really good habit to get into. Okay, so if I save that and refresh, we've got our 2 most recent posts, and we can click on the date, the title, or read more to go to that individual post. That's going to bring this lesson to a close. Let's keep things rolling, and I'll see you in the next one.